Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Burning Blue, the untold story of Christa McAuliffe and NASA's Challenger disaster. By Kevin Cook. Narrated by Rick Adamson. Up, up the long, delirious, burning blue, I've topped the wind-swept heights with easy grace, where never lark nor eagle flew. And while with silent lifting mind I've trod the high untrespassed sanctity of space, put out my hand and touched the face of God. From the poem High Flight by John Gillespie Magee. Prologue. They were all on edge. They'd spent the day before the same way, strapped to their seats in launch position for 5 hours, lying on their backs looking up at their knees. After that, the third scrub in 3 days, a friend asked Christa McAuliffe how it felt to be cooped up for so long. "Put on a motorcycle helmet," she said. "Lie on the floor with your legs up on a bed. You can't read, you can't watch television. You're strapped down, with oxygen lines and wires coming out of your suit. Lie there for 5 hours, and you'll know how it feels." Today's delay was an hour and counting. Overnight, record-setting cold had frosted crops in the orange groves and strawberry fields near Cape Canaveral. Now, on the coldest morning in 20 years, the crew of the Space Shuttle Challenger waited while NASA workers used broomsticks to knock icicles off the shuttle. It was chilly on the flight deck, Challenger's cockpit. Mission Specialist Ellison Onizuka said his nose was frozen. Mission Specialist Judith Resnick claimed she had it worse. "My butt is dead." Below them, on the windowless middeck, Payload Specialist McAuliffe dozed through the latest delay. Then the radio crackled. "This is NASA Tower. We are planning to come out of this hold on time." The best possible news. Commander Dick Scobie radioed back, "Roger, that's great." 6 flight deck windows gave Scobie a panoramic view of cold blue sky. "Well, y'all on the middeck," he said, sounding like an airline pilot, "it's clear blue out today." Mike Smith, sitting in the pilot's seat to Scobie's right, flicked switches that activated the ship's auxiliary power units. "APUs coming on," he said. Scobie checked his instrument panel. "Pressure on all 3 APUs. Next, he confirmed that each crew member was sealing his or her flight helmet. "Visors coming down." At T-2 minutes, he thumbed the intercom to Smith, Resnick, Onizuka, McAuliffe, Mission Specialist Ron McNair, and Payload Specialist Greg Jarvis. "Welcome to space, guys," he said. At T-147, a robot arm pulled back the hood of the rust-colored fuel tank that dwarfed the shuttle clamped to its back. "There goes the beanie cap," Scobie said. "Doesn't it go the other way?" Onizuka asked. He was joking. "God, I hope not. 30 seconds. At T-16 seconds, water cannons sprayed 300,000 gallons of water into the trench below the stack, the 184-foot-tall contraption made up of the shuttle, its giant fuel tank, and a pair of rocket boosters. The water would muffle the thunder of launch, keeping sound waves coming off the engines from pounding upward through the stack's fiery exhaust and damaging the shuttle. At T-10, loudspeakers at the launch pad and the bleachers at Kennedy Space Center, 3 miles away, carried the countdown. 9, 8. At T-6, the crew felt the cabin shake as the first of the shuttle's 3 onboard engines came to life, followed by 2 more booms from the second and third. The engine's thrust made the towering stack sway sideways by almost 2 feet, the so-called twang effect a queasy rider like McAuliffe could feel in her stomach. Scobie said, 3 at 100. All 3 engines were at full power. In the next instant, guided by the shuttle's computers, the stack returned to vertical, and the solid rocket boosters fired. The silo-shaped SRBs, each weighing 1.3 million pounds, would provide 80% of the force required to thrust the shuttle, crew, and cargo into orbit. They were the most powerful rockets ever built. Astronauts had a saying, once those SRBs get lit, the stack's going somewhere, you just hope it's the right direction. 8 massive bolts held the stack to the launch pad. Each bolt was wired to an explosive charge. At the instant the SRBs ignited, 11:38:0001 a.m. Eastern Time, on January 28, 1986, the bolts detonated, and the stack began to rise. Clearing the launch platform in clouds of fire and white exhaust, it took 8 seconds to reach 100 miles per hour. Within a minute, it was moving 15 times as fast, the speed of a rifle bullet. The crew held on, while the $2 billion shuttle shook and groaned like a rust bucket freighter in a typhoon. No astronaut training simulator came close to matching the bone-rattling racket of an actual launch. The windows shook. Shock waves sent shivers through the cabin walls, through the astronauts' steel seats and the fillings in their teeth, pressing them earthward at 3 Gs, enough to make a 128-pound social studies teacher feel like she weighed 384. But this was the moment she'd been dreaming of for the past year. Astronauts had told her it would be loud, and it was, loud and scary, but now they were less than 2 minutes from orbit. Commander Scobie and Pilot Smith talked to Mission Control. Mission specialists Resnick, Onizuka, and McNair had duties of their own. McAuliffe, America's teacher in space, had nothing to do but hold on. Chapter 1. Sharon Christa Corrigan was a 7th grader in Framingham, Massachusetts, on May 5, 1961, the day Alan Shepard became the first American to fly into space. Christa, as everyone called her, joined classmates to watch the launch on a portable TV in the school cafeteria. The grainy black-and-white screen showed Shepard in his cramped capsule atop an 80-foot Mercury Redstone rocket that could launch him skyward or blow him to bits. After 3 hours of glitches and delays, Shepard was pissed. He radioed launch control. "Fix your little problems," he said, "and light this candle." Christa Corrigan grew up with the space program. Her favorite TV hero was Superman, the man who flew faster than rockets. Her political hero was President Kennedy, who announced that the United States would put a man on the moon before the decade was out. As a schoolgirl, she followed Shepard's suborbital flight and safe landing, John Glenn's 1962 orbits of Earth, and the rest of the Mercury and Gemini programs. She thought it would be neat to be an astronaut, but Christa was a practical person. America was out to put a man on the moon, not a robot, a monkey, or a woman. She wouldn't have made much of an astronaut anyway, a chubby Girl Scout with no knack for science or math who got sick to her stomach on carnival rides. She had barely survived to go to school in the first place. As an infant, she spent her first few weeks fighting a gastrointestinal illness, wailing and wasting away at Boston Children's Hospital, while her parents held her little hands and prayed. Doctors kept the baby alive by poking tubes into her arms and scalp, feeding her a mixture of glucose and water until a new antibiotic, aureomycin, saved her life. After that, she kept charging at life as if life was a gift. As a toddler, she rode her tricycle into traffic on busy Columbia Street. 3-year-old Christa pedaled for all she was worth, cars zipping by in both directions. The family dog, a mutt named Teddy, took off after her. Teddy yapped and ran circles around the little girl on the trike until traffic stopped. Grace Corrigan corralled her daughter and led her home, giving thanks to St. Christopher, the patron saint of travelers, for whom the girl was named. As an overachieving high schooler, there was a special vibrancy to her, recalled one of the nuns who taught her at Framingham's Marian High School. While babysitting 4 younger siblings, taking piano and guitar lessons, and working on weekends at a dry cleaner, Christa found time to join the Glee Club, Drama Club, German Club, Ceramics Club, Girls Basketball Team, and Student Council, and to play a singing nun in a school production of The Sound of Music. An average student, in her own estimation, she worked hard to make more A's than B's. Classmates like Steve McAuliffe, the Clark Kent look-alike who became her boyfriend, spent senior year fielding college scholarship offers. Christa got none. A guidance counselor told her that a girl like her had 4 practical options. She could be a secretary, a nurse, a stewardess, or a teacher. Christa couldn't type. She couldn't stand the sight of blood. The thought of flying made her queasy. She told her boyfriend that she intended to be a school teacher, and one other thing. If you asked me to marry you, I'd say yes. He hoped she wasn't joking. Will you marry me? Yes, she said, but we have to wait till we graduate college. Steve was willing to wait. He accepted a scholarship from the Virginia Military Institute, 600 miles away, and promised to stay faithful to her. Christa chose Framingham State College, a commuter school where tuition was only $200 a year. Save your money for the boys, she told her parents, referring to her 2 younger brothers. I'll live at home and get all the education I need. At Framingham State, where she majored in education before switching to history, she never missed an 8 a.m. class taught by Dean of Women Corolla Haglund, the history of westward movement. Campus gossips whispered that Haglund, who focused on the lives of the women and children history tended to forget, was a lesbian. Christa couldn't care less if Dean Haglund was a Martian. She was enthralled by Haglund's readings from the journals of women riding 19th-century wagon trains on the Santa Fe Trail, a 1,000-mile trek from Missouri to New Mexico that took 15 months. One pioneer woman wrote that she gave birth on the trail, then I rode horseback and carried my baby on the saddle. Between school activities, studying, and a part-time job waiting tables at Howard Johnson's, Christa kindled her long-distance romance by driving her Volkswagen Beetle through 6 states to visit Steve. It was a 9-hour drive in good traffic from Framingham to the VMI campus in Lexington, Virginia, but she said it was worth the trouble. When friends asked about their sleeping arrangements, she winked. On the way home, she often stopped in Washington, D.C., 19-year-old Christa Corrigan spent free afternoons sitting in the gallery during Supreme Court hearings or touring the National Air and Space Museum, looking up at Charles Lindbergh's single-seat airplane, the Spirit of St. Louis. In her junior and senior years at Framingham State, my radical years, she called them, she attended her first rock concert, a Jefferson Airplane show at Boston's Back Bay Theater. She began wearing paisley dresses, white lipstick, and granny glasses. In 1969, she marched against the Vietnam War. She told her parents she was sorry if her activism made them uneasy, but would not apologize for her beliefs. On graduation day in 1970, she wore a black armband to protest the war. Ed and Grace Corrigan's consolation came 2 months later. In a full-dress Catholic mass and wedding at the Corrigans' home parish, St. Jeremiah, 3 blocks from the house where Christa grew up, Stephen James McAuliffe married his high school sweetheart. Neither of them had gone steady with anyone else since they began dating at the age of 15. The bespectacled groom and his groomsmen wore white tuxes with black trim and black bow ties. The white-gowned bride had daisies in her hair. After their vows, a guitarist strummed "A Time for Us," the love theme from the 1968 movie Romeo and Juliet. Christa took her husband's name. That was a choice she would second-guess for years. What kind of example was she setting, changing her name for no reason except that society expected it? How would her husband feel about spending the rest of his life as Steve Corrigan? At the same time, she loved her new name, the look and sound of it. Christa McAuliffe. She had written the name 1,000 times in schoolgirl journals and notebooks. Now it was hers, inscribed in her careful cursive loops on the ledger at the Public House Historic Inn in Sturbridge, Massachusetts, where she and Steve spent their wedding night. The public house was all antique, she wrote home to her mother. There was lemon soap and 2 apples on our bureau. For the next 3 years, as Steve attended law school at George Washington University, Christa worked as a substitute teacher and waitress. She took night classes to earn her master's degree in secondary school education at Bowie State, an inexpensive, historically black college where she was one of the few white students. She and Steve had always said they'd return to New England when they got around to raising a family, but by the time their first child, Scott Corrigan McAuliffe, was born on September 11, 1976, my bicentennial baby, Christa called him, they had spent their first 6 years of married life in and around Washington, D.C. According to family lore, they were as happy as a sitcom couple until the following year, when Steve came through the door one evening with a surprise. "Honey, I'm home, and guess what?" His wife had taught a full day of classes, finished the housework, shopping, and laundry, and prepared their dinner. "They want me at Justice," Steve said. "A job in the Carter administration. Isn't that great?" Christa said, "You can live where you want, but Scott and I are going to live in New Hampshire." So much for Justice. Steve looked for work in New Hampshire. He took a job in the state attorney general's office, and they moved to Concord, the state capital, a town of 30,000 built on the banks of the Merrimack River. A Norman Rockwell kind of place, Christa called it. In 1979, she gave birth to a daughter, Caroline, who is named after 2 of Christa's heroines, her Aunt Carrie and Caroline Kennedy, JFK's daughter. Caroline Corrigan McAuliffe and her brother Scott grew up in a brown-shingled 3-story house their parents bought after Steve switched from the Attorney General's office to a more lucrative private practice. Built in the 1920s, the house shivered when the wind blew. Christa filled the place with heirlooms, including her grandmother's mahogany dining room table, which must have weighed a ton, and tag sale buys, like a church pew she turned into a sofa. She relaxed with needlepoint or a copy of Good Housekeeping. Soon she and Steve hired a contractor to knock out part of the roof, put in a skylight, and install a 3rd-floor jacuzzi where they could unwind after their workdays, looking up at the stars. Christa went to work at Bow Memorial, a middle school near Concord. She became the most popular teacher there, a spirited lecturer who told her students there was more to history than old white men in paintings. "History's happening now. We're part of it," she said. She tacked Time and People magazine covers to the bulletin board. Ronald Reagan, Michael Jackson, Indiana Jones, the Mount St. Helens volcano, the brand-new Rubik's Cube. She brought in a used car salesman to tell teenagers how not to get cheated when they bought their first cars. She taught grammar and punctuation using the publication her students cared about most, the driver's manual. One thing I loved about her teaching was her ability to bring the world into her classroom, says her friend and fellow teacher, Eileen O'Hara. One day she walked into school carrying her books, papers, and a saucepan. A particular dish had come up in class, and a few of her students had never heard of it, so she cooked a pot of it and brought it to school so her class could taste it. As president of the Bow Memorial's Teachers Union, Christa McAuliffe announced that New Hampshire should be ashamed to rank 49th out of the 50 states in education funding. The superintendent of schools didn't appreciate reading that quote in the Concord Monitor. She thought it was a crime that teachers were paid so badly and women were second-class citizens, a friend recalls. Christa applied for the job of assistant principal at Bow Memorial, but the school board turned her down. The official reason? No administrative experience. She told friends she was pretty sure she knew the real reason. They didn't want a woman on top. In 1983, she landed her dream job, teaching social studies at Concord High School. Everything about Concord High was neat, high praise from her. She invited various professionals to speak to her students, people like the director of the New Hampshire ACLU, O'Hara recalls. Through a program with a local bar association, she got a volunteer lawyer in the classroom to sit in on her classes and answer students' questions. Again, she was connecting her classroom with the real world. Within a semester, Christa had joined every faculty committee in sight and launched a frankly feminist social studies course called The American Woman. 15 girls and 1 intrepid boy signed up. Like Corolla Haglund, Mrs. McAuliffe made textbook accounts lively and even controversial, a former student says. Christa brought her guitar to class and sang 60s protest songs. She had her students dress in period costumes and act out scenes starring Susan B. Anthony, Amelia Earhart, and Rosa Parks. Students voted on which women to study. One of their choices was Sally Ride, America's first female astronaut, who flew in the Space Shuttle Challenger that year. 20 years after she and Steve met at Marion High, the McAuliffes were living the life they had pictured as ambitious, sincere, slightly nerdy teenagers. Every weekday evening, Christa tucked the children into bed, then brewed a cup of tea and took it to the living room. Sitting in front of the TV with the sound turned low, she sipped her tea and graded papers. Everybody loved Christa, says her college classmate Mary Liscombe, but it's not like she was a saint. Mrs. McAuliffe fibbed on a lease application in Maryland, for instance, checking no pets after she and Steve adopted a cat they named Rizzo after the Dustin Hoffman character in Midnight Cowboy. In Concord, she organized a group of moms who'd pile into her VW van for raids on a Manchester grocery warehouse where they scored 40% and 50% discounts by posing as buyers for a supermarket chain. They bought 50-pound sacks of flour and sugar, gallon jars of pickles, jugs of maple syrup, and spices at a discount and divvied it up at a friend's house. On August 28, 1984, a Tuesday, Christa picked up the Concord Monitor off the porch. The headline read, "Reagan Wants Teacher in Space." A photo showed astronaut Judith Resnick, who had followed Sally Ride as the second female astronaut, climbing from the cockpit of a supersonic jet. According to the story, NASA was looking for a school teacher to fly on a space shuttle mission. "Today, I'm directing NASA to begin a search," President Reagan had announced, "to choose as the first citizen passenger in the history of our space program one of America's finest, a teacher." She didn't have time to read the whole story. She was pressed for time during her usual weekday morning drill of whipping up 4 breakfasts, getting 8-year-old Scott out of bed, fed, dressed, and ready for grade school, waking 5-year-old Caroline and doing the same for her. After she'd showered and dressed, she gathered up her daughter and the papers she'd graded the night before and drove to Concord High, where she dropped Caroline off at the school's student-run daycare center. Every morning we'd see her arrive right before or just after the bell, with books and papers under one arm and Caroline in the other, another teacher remembered. 15 years after Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walked on the moon, NASA was looking for headlines. The glories of the Apollo program had ended when Apollo 17 astronauts Gene Cernan and Harrison Schmitt completed humankind's last moonwalk in 1972. Since then, with no extraterrestrial world within reach, the space program had shifted from missions of exploration to flights by 4 shuttles, space trucks some called them, to perform experiments and place satellites in orbit. The first shuttle missions had recaptured some of NASA's old glory, but within a year of Ride's news-making flight, shuttle launches had become so routine that the TV networks no longer carried them live. Facing budget cuts from Congress, the agency considered sending a celebrity into space. But 1984 was an election year, and education was an election issue. The Reagan administration's budget cuts had led the National Education Association, which represented more than 2 million schoolteachers, to denounce Reagan as America's Scrooge on education and endorse his Democratic rival, Walter Mondale. With the election 3 months away, the president and his advisors saw a chance to promote the space program and win teachers' votes in one stroke. When that shuttle lifts off, Reagan announced, America will be reminded of the crucial role that teachers and education play in the life of our nation. I can't think of a better lesson for our children and our country. That fall, Christa and her friend Eileen O'Hara attended a National Council for Social Studies conference in Washington. That's where she found the NASA booth advertising the Teacher in Space program. I wasn't surprised she picked up an application, O'Hara says. She thought it would be a great way to influence students, not because it could make her famous, but because it was something unusual, something fun. Returning with a sheaf of application forms, Christa passed them around to Concord High colleagues and sent one in herself. A week later, she found a shiny silver and blue package in the mailbox, NASA's official 12-page application, designed to weed out anyone who might think of applying on a lark. The application called for lengthy answers to essay questions and multiple letters of recommendation. One newsman estimated that it would take a serious contender more than 100 hours to complete. Steve McAuliffe looked it over. Like millions of boys growing up in the 60s, he had dreamed of being an astronaut. He said, "Christa, you should go for it." But she didn't. 2 months passed before he reminded her that the deadline was only 2 weeks away. "This is a don't miss," he said. "Not a can't miss, considering the odds, but a long shot worth taking." His wife disagreed. "They'll have scientists and PhDs," she said. Then, with time running out, she decided to go for it. She rounded up recommendations. She spent lunch breaks composing essays about her community involvement, communication skills, and philosophy of teaching, then tore up her essays and rewrote them on a clean notebook paper in her tidy cursive, until she noticed the fine print on the first page, "Please note, application form must be typed." She turned to her friend O'Hara, who had taken a job typing legal documents for Steve's firm. The 3 of them worked nights on Christa's Teacher in Space application. Christa would bring her handwritten pages to Steve's office after work and finish her essays with Eileen and Steve's help. "Why do you want to be the first U.S. private citizen in space? As a woman," she wrote, "I have been envious of those men who could participate in the space program and who were encouraged to excel in the areas of math and science. I felt that women had indeed been left outside of one of the most exciting careers available." Steve read that over and said he doubted NASA was looking for some sort of women's liber. Christa pressed on. When Sally Ride and other women began to train as astronauts, I could look among my students and see ahead of them an ever-increasing list of opportunities, she wrote. I cannot join the space program and restart my life as an astronaut, but this opportunity to...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?